their business, with the idea that once you have an embedded platform, then the monetization comes with sort of these other features and services. For us, we'll have to think about, how much of that margin do we translate to us and how much do we incentivize, product purchases, and some of that will evolve over time. But I think the street should just look at how you're doing from an overall growth in your processing volume, and then how are you doing with sort of the rollout of the next generation platform to become a credit card processor or a payment facilitator.
Okay. And I think you guys have talked about mid this year in terms of taking the step on the PayFac side. Is that still the current plan?
It is. So we're right now in beta right now, trying to get that kind of feedback to say, do we have it sort of the way we want? Do we need to kind of do any more sort of software revisions? And, as you're probably aware, with software, you're always tweaking it a little bit. So it needs to deliver the value that we want. But my guess is there'll continue to be some, evolutionary changes that we make along the way.
Okay. Okay, great. Maybe just moving on to Daxi. Obviously, a big step forward in terms of getting this FDA inspection lined up for this month. So maybe just walk us through, under a typical kind of process, how much back and forth after the inspection happens, how much back and forth is there? How long does that process typically take? Recognize that nothing's typical about the last
Sure.
12 months or so, but how should we think about at least maybe the bookends?
Yeah, well, when you're in a PDUFA setting, you have multiple work streams that are happening in parallel, right? So that's the environment that we all are familiar with, aware of. So normally from the time they show up to the time you get, approval, that can be kind of a 6 to 10 week type of process, depending on what happens. They're on site for, 2 to 3 weeks. There's probably some questions that they have, which either you satisfactorily answer or you don't, in which case you get a CRL. But typically there's questions that you answer to try and address what they've raised. And some things might even be, kind of post-market commitments that you make. And then as part of the overall package, it goes through internal sign-off, which can take, a couple of weeks to get everything signed off. In this sort of, COVID situation, where in our case, that was the only thing that was outstanding, it's hard to know exactly, will this process fall into those time windows? Will it be quicker in terms of inspection? Will it take a little longer? And then on the back end of that, how quickly will sort of the final pieces get signed off on? So we don't have a ton of visibility to that. We're cautiously optimistic that it will follow a similar pathway. We feel very good in terms of our preparedness. Certainly with that extra time, we've done additional work internally from a mock inspection and stuff. And continue to build product in preparation for launch. But yeah, in kind of a part of a PDUFA would be probably this, kind of 6 to 10 week type of process post them being in. And then, what that sign off process would look like in this environment, it's hard to know.
Okay. Okay, understood. And then, how much more visibility would you give us between now and then, or is it pretty much just going to be when you get the approval decision? That's kind of the next. Update we'll have in terms of the street.
That'll be the next update. Obviously, if there was something that was not favorable, we would certainly release that. But really, the next update would be approval. Again, we broke sort of our traditional protocol, which hopefully investors can appreciate. Which is normally when you're in those are confidential discussions. There's a lot of back and forth, a lot of things. Typically, we wouldn't make those comments. We obviously did before our PDUFA date, because at that point in time, it was obvious they weren't going to show up in time for that to happen, given everything going on with the pandemic. And we also thought it was important, given this uncertainty of, okay, there is no clear path forward, that we at least tell people, hey, this is what's happening. This is the last gating item. And so the next announcement would be approval.
Okay. Okay. Sounds good. And maybe just obviously the other, two big picture questions are just the label and then kind of the pricing side. And I know, maybe just remind us of kind of, the confidence in the differentiated label, and then the pricing side. No, you're not going to comment yet, but just, as you think about the framework, what are some of the key inputs here? And again, especially now that you have a filler product, how are you thinking about the, potential for a bundle?
Yeah. So first on the label side, very consistent with what we said previously. We believe that, at the very least, that the clinical trial data from the Sakura programs will be reflected in the label. There was an acute endpoint in terms of 2 lines of improvement, and then the secondary endpoint of the loss of none or mild over time, which is where we showed pretty consistent 24-week data. So we expect that at the very least will be in the label, and that will be the basis for labeling claims. And then there was also discussion about whether or not there'll be specific statements around duration, and we said that will be wait to be seen on that side of it. So we feel very good, consistent with our prior commentary, that the clinical trial data will be reflected in the label, and that based on that, we'll be able to make claims regarding the duration profile that we've seen on that side of it. On the pricing piece of it, again, we are going to keep that sort of under wraps until we kind of come into the market. But what we have said is, hey, listen, if you look at the consumer research that we've done, consumers have said, hey, for a product that lasts roughly twice as long as others, I'd be willing to pay twice as much. So we think that the end consumer might be willing to pay up to 2 times. Now, I think the closer you get to 2 times, the harder it becomes. And so probably the end consumer price is south of 2 times. But we've also said that we expect that given the hundreds of millions of dollars we've invested in innovation and the performance profile, that we expect accounts to pay more than conventional neuromodulators. But sort of therein is a sort of a stack of, we'll charge more than conventional neuromodulators. Physicians will turn around and market up to consumers, and they'll be able to make a good margin, a better margin, we believe, than what they're making today. And the consumers will pay more. Well, we've also said that we're pursuing kind of a segmentation strategy. We're not trying to make this for everybody. And I think actually sometimes when you tell people it's expensive and it might not be right for you, we find that some consumers then say, well, no, but I want sort of that best thing. And so that's kind of the overall approach. With fillers, we've been pretty straightforward with our pricing. We offer kind of a couple different levels based on the volume that you purchase. Obviously, we will rethink this with the neuromodulator when it comes into the market in HintMD to see what kind of additional discounts might we provide practices that lean in more. But we're truly trying to keep this very simple and have very competitive pricing, but have the physicians, frankly, win more in terms of their ability to charge more than necessarily increasing margin by lowering the acquisition price.
Okay, got it. And maybe just one follow-up on the label question. So it sounds like there's kind of 2 potential outcomes. One is you have the Sakura data reflected, but there's no statement regarding kind of, frequency of treatment or frequency of dosing. And the second scenario is the data's in there, and then there is some language regarding the frequency of dosing. Is that correct?
I think that's a fair characterization. And I would argue in sort of both cases that we feel very good that it would allow us to make the kind of labeling claims that we think are going to be important to showcase the duration benefits. Okay.
And is there any precedent for FDA, like not to have a dosing frequency on the label, or would that be something that would be kind of a new precedent?
Yeah, no, I think that the agency over time is evolving to less be in the game of trying to be the ones to characterize sort of the duration profile and let sort of the clinical data ultimately speak for itself. And so you can go pros and cons. On the one end, you might make an argument that a specific duration statement allows maybe for stronger claims, and that's it. On the other hand, you could argue with a duration statement of, for example, up to, it may actually be limiting because, that sort of suggests that that's as far out as it goes. And as we all know, with duration, it tends to be as part of a curve. Some last longer, some are shorter.
Okay, great. And then maybe one more for Toby. I know we've talked about this in the past, but as you guys think about, providing revenue guidance at some point in the future,